Hi, welcome back to Story Time with Dave Booker. Appreciate you being here. Today we're going to continue on with the readings of Sheriff in a Small Town 2, a New Threat. So we got 3 chapters to get through today, so let's begin. First chapter we're going to be doing is Rebuilding. Morgan was cruising around town with Josh. Both were keeping a sharp eye on things, with Morgan explaining what to look for. To Josh, it was like seeing the town for the first time. He was seeing things from a new perspective. He had to think about how people were walking, how they were looking around. He had to determine threats by small details, not just threats, but people's emotions and whether or not they looked as if they needed help. Morgan told about how Talbot had seen a couple with a little girl. Something about their actions and the looks on their faces made Talbot concerned. His actions returned the kidnapped child to her parents. Just listen to your gut. If something feels wrong, it's usually because something is. The more time you spend with Rocky Talbot and I, the easier it will come to you. Excuse me. Josh enjoyed his round with Morgan. He was learning things he'd never expected. Morgan even introduced him to the hobo camp. He'd never even known it existed. He'd heard of hobos before, but never realized they were, in a sense, part of the community. As they drove around, he asked Morgan about his times as sheriff. Morgan spoke of it easily, as if some of his adventures were just a routine part of the job. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. He had the better part of a wall at the Historical Society that spoke glowingly of his achievements. Same was true for Rocky and Talbot. He began to wish for something to happen while he wore the badge so that his name could be seen amongst theirs. They stopped at the hot dog hut for lunch. Morgan had 3 chili dogs, but Josh stuck to a simple hot dog. They went to the field to eat. Sitting in the shade of an oak tree, they not only enjoyed the meal, but the peace and quiet. It was a far cry from a few days ago when people were at each other's throats. Josh looked over at Morgan, who had swiftly finished his lunch and was leaning back with his eyes closed. Sir, it's it's so quiet again. Is everything back to normal? Morgan opened it one eye. Don't you believe it? This might be just the calm before the storm. People are embarrassed and upset with themselves. Hell, they have every right to be. But it'll only take a small thing to make the anger flare again. That's why there are 4 of us keeping the town in sight. By moving around continually, they know we're watching and ready. He closed his eyes, leaned back momentarily. So he snapped upright. Hey, where's your brick? Josh hadn't a clue what he was talking about. Why should he carry a brick? Morgan pulled out the large walkie-talkie he always carried with him when in uniform. This is what we call a brick. Where's yours? Josh was still confused. It was a big, heavy thing, and I figured since you had yours, he didn't get any further. Morgan's face turned red, and he was about to roar. Josh cringed at the incoming onslaught. Morgan quickly remembered that Josh didn't have any training and was learning on the fly. He quickly calmed down, and those words were gentle. They were said in a firmness that made Josh listen intently. Josh, I'm only going to explain this once, so pay attention. I am depending on you, and so is Rocky and Talbot. When we asked you to do this, you swore an oath to serve and protect the people of this town. Well, that oath also means we protect each other. To do that, we both need to be able to radio for backup if needed. I was put out of commission, and I would have to depend on you to call for assistance, maybe even medical. Always remember that you may hold the life of your partner in your hands. If I tell you to do something, and it isn't a request, consider it an order that you will obey. I'll teach you all I can, and so will the others, but while you wear that badge, you must be willing to learn and do what we're teaching you. If you can't, then hand over that badge now and you go work up the paper. Up to that point, Josh had concerned himself more of, along for the ride, rather than as a serious part of the team. Morgan had just informed him that he was very much one of them, so he changed his whole outlook. To be told that another person's life might depend on his actions was something he had never considered. All his life, all he wanted to do was succeed, and here was a good place to make that happen. He adjusted the badge on his shirt and asked to go back and retrieve his brick. Morgan slowly got up and stretched. When Josh leapt up, ready to go, he put his arm around his shoulder. Sorry I got on my hind feet, but I need to know where you stood. Glad you're considering yourself really one of the team since it makes a world of difference to the rest of us. With his back up, with a brick on his belt, his uniform was complete. They returned to the squad car to finish their rounds. Morgan got in, but Josh was still standing beside the open door. He was watching a man and woman walking away from him. Something in the way the man was holding her was making Josh uncomfortable. Posture of the woman was leaning away from the man from the hips. He was holding her close and very tight, with his arm around her shoulders. But it wasn't out of affection. Creases in her sleeve told him as much. She was going along, but not of her own accord. Josh tapped Morgan and pointed. Morgan saw what he was seeing and got out at a run. Josh was amazed that the old man could run so fast. Josh called out. The man turned his head and saw a sheriff and deputy charging towards him. He violently pushed the woman away into a building wall and took off. Morgan pulled his weapon and with his other hand pointed at the woman who had hit her head and was on the ground bleeding. Well, Josh now understood why they both wore bricks. He called in for an ambulance on a channel that connected to the hospital. He took out his handkerchief and placed it on the gash in her temple. Holding it down, his large hand covered her face. After ensuring she was still breathing, he scanned the area for the ambulance. Morgan was soon back with the man in tow. From the looks of their clothes, it appeared as if Morgan had done a flying tackle to bring him down. Morgan had the man in a hard pressure grip that was keeping the man quiet, although he writhed as if under severe pain. Jess had assumed that Morgan would have, shot at him or at least fired a warning shot, but he hadn't heard the gun go off and it was back in his holster. Morgan nodded and placed his captive in the back of the squad car. Taking off, Josh was left on his own, but would meet up at the courthouse once the ambulance came. The woman was just shaking off the shock when the ambulance arrived. She went into hysterics and they put her under an oxygen mask to calm her down. Once sure that she was taken care of, Josh tore off back to the courthouse. Reaching it, he was out of breath. It was almost an insult that Morgan had chased down his man and come back without breathing hard at all. Besides going through some intensive training. Entering the courthouse, the man was throwing the bed against the cell walls and bars, roaring and cursing. The aggressive noise was setting Josh on edge, but Morgan was finishing his call for pickup as if the man was quietly sleeping. Josh couldn't imagine by what means Morgan had even gotten him out of the squad car and into the cell. Hold on 1 second, I need to drink. Yeah, that's better. Morgan poured out a coffee for Josh and informed him that Agnes was dropping by with lunch for them. Didn't we just have lunch? Nah, that was just an appetizer. Agnes cooks just like her mom. Her mom was a fantastic cook. Just got sorry. Just got that faraway look a person gets when they are remembering something fondly. I remember. Either Sanchez were special. Her homemade bread made working hard at anything worth it. Behind them, the tumultuous violence to the cell continued. As they talked, the state police came for pickup. Morgan handed over the charge sheet and got a receipt in return. When they opened the door, as if they had opened the gate on a mad bull. He bellowed and barreled past them, flinging them aside. He charged at Morgan. Josh looked over his shoulder and saw the man charging. Without thinking, Josh's body spun like a top, his fist launching with everything he had. He caught the man in the upper chest, his feet flying off the ground, and he landed on his back, knocking the wind out of him. Josh hadn't realized he had struck so hard. An instinct, Rocky's training from years ago that allowed him to subdue the villain. State police cuffed hands and feet and then cuffed the two together so the man was immobilized, but still thrashed as much as he was able to. Driving him to the car, the man was handled perhaps a little rougher than usual. Morgan was at the window watching them depart. When he turned to Josh, he had a mile-wide grin. Great work, Deputy. Josh felt a tingle go up his spine and he got goosebumps. Boy, to call him Deputy. Never had a single word affected him so much. Meant that he was accepted as part of the team on an equal footing. Nothing in his life had made him feel so proud. When Ez came in, Rocky was with her. They sat around the office and feasted off the contents of the basket Rocky had struggled to bring in. As always, she had brought in enough for them and more. Morgan sliced the bread, Rocky the cold meatloaf, and Josh took care of slicing onions and tomatoes. With a side of potato salad, they dug in. After a while, Morgan told about their adventure of the morning, how Josh had used his recent training in spotting problems to notice a woman being abducted. He proudly spoke of his handling of her injuries and quick thinking and calling for aid. Finally, he boasted about Josh knocking the man out with a single blow to the chest that sent him flying off his feet. Josh listened to his own feat sounding more interesting and impressive by Morgan telling the tale. Reggie sat there grinning and nodding as if saying, I always knew he had it in him. Josh saw pride in Rocky's eyes, the pride of a big brother who was glad that his teachings had stuck even after all these years. Agnes hugged him, which was the best congratulations he'd ever received. Felt like Morgan's wife coming back to life. Josh finished up the shift without more excitement, went home and changed, then sought out Jane to tell her of his first official duty day. Arriving at her house, he was told she wasn't home yet. She'd left about lunchtime to visit Mary Campbell. Mary Campbell wasn't a lot of help. Jane had come over and stayed a while, but left. At the corner, she had up with some man when she turned on Main Street. Some man? Josh was beginning to burn and asked for a description. Oh, dark slacks and shirt, tennis shoes, black hair. Mary said Jane didn't seem pleased to see the man, but the man put his arm around her and they walked away. Sudden realization struck like a bolt of lightning. His forehead grew clammy at the thought that the woman was Jane. He tore off to the courthouse. Bursting in, he was relieved that Rocky was still there. Hey, can you take me to the hospital? That was Jane! Rocky leapt out of the seat and was struck in moments. Just as Rocky started the truck, tearing off, they sped to the hospital. Rocky wasn't the sheriff. He'd be up for one hell of a ticket. Rocky offered to hang around, but Josh said he'd catch a taxi if he needed a ride. Rocky was on duty, and Josh didn't want Morgan to wait to get off. All right, but let us know how she is. He waited and went back to the office a great deal slower. Walking into the hospital, he asked to see Jane. Nurse on duty was about to say no, but one of the ambulance drivers finished writing his report and recognized Josh. He turned to the nurse and pointed at Josh with his thumb. You might want to let him in. He rescued her from being abducted, gave her immediate first aid like a pro, and kept her safe. The nurse still wasn't convinced, but she saw the deep concern in his eyes and led him to her room. Jane was sitting in bed with a compressed bandage down her forehead. She had a couple of stitches that were also bandaged. She let out a squeal of delight at seeing Josh and instantly regretted it when her head began to ache again. The nurse smiled at the look on Jane's face at seeing Josh. Well, since she seems to know you, I'll let you two alone. He sat beside her and held her close. His embrace was gentle, warm, and loving. She looked into his eyes and began to cry. He kissed away her tears. I know what happened, so you don't have to talk about it. Sending consolation. I'd have knocked the bastard off his feet when he charged at Morgan. Good, she said softly. I heard you talking to me, but I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. Josh, I was so scared. He had a knife at my side, and she couldn't finish, and he again told her she didn't need to. The man was gone, and she was safe. Hell, I may have to marry you just to keep you safe. She let out another joyful squeal and again regretted it. He shook his head and called his parents for pickup once she was able to leave the hospital. He also called into the courthouse to report that Jane was all right and leaving the hospital soon. On the drive home, he sat in the back seat with Jane in his arms. His mom drove the long way around town and was grinning as she looked at the loving couple in back. Her life was full. She had a loving family, a son who would soon have a wife, and she would have a daughter-in-law to teach all her son's favorite recipes. She decided it was time to bring out the knitting needles and get started. She knew it would exasperate her husband, but Matt didn't understand these things. She planned to spend the day with Jane's mom tomorrow and start working out details for the wedding. Dad was doing a walk around town with Josh. It was late in the evening, and the streets were streaming after a hot day and late rain. They were approaching the Triple RX Tavern, named for its close proximity to the railroad crossing. Raised voices could be heard from outside. Houston, you're a damn fool. If you think that turning this town into a historical whatever is any good, we won't be able to change anything after that, and we'll end up in like exhibits in a zoo with everybody on show for all the city folks who come here to laugh at us hicks. I need another drink. Houston's raspy, slurred voice could be heard even further down the street. Yeah, and you'd make an A1 exhibit. Yeah, you really are a prime example of a small town hick. What the hell do you care about change? You've been wearing the same shirt and pants for the past 10 years. Probably the same skivvies, too. Yeah, well, that damn horse of yours ought to make a damn fine exhibit. Comes in here and spends half the night drinking. Bartender roared out. I'll take his horse any day over you two. He comes in here, has a drink, and never gets into an argument over stupid shit like you two do. Josh was feeling out of his depths hearing this. Most of the words made sense, except for the bit about the horse. Sound of a blow hitting flesh and Zach staggering out almost into Talbot's arms made Talbot upset. He didn't like these fights, and while they didn't happen often, at a time like this, it was like holding a match to a powder keg. Houston came out next. To hell with y'all. I'm going home. Horse, come on. Talbot told Zach to head home, was watching him sluggishly depart, hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. Well, as long as he didn't run into anyone on the block and a half home, he should be all right. Sitting outside the door, Josh saw Houston hunched over, hands on knees, and continuing to yell, Horse, get your flea-bitten hide out here now. He waited a moment more, then, waving a dismissive hand, he spat on the ground. Fine. Go home when you damn well feel like it. I'm off. He marched off home, stammering slightly, but heading straight as an arrow. Talbot was rubbing his upper lip and decided that Josh could go in and send Horace home. Go in and tell Horace it's time to go. Josh squared his shoulders, thinking Horace was a name like Hoss, biggest Cartwright brother from Bonanza. Striding in, he screeched to a halt at the side of an actual horse standing at the bar, casually drinking beer out of a bowl. Well, nothing in life had prepared him to tell a horse it was time to go home. The eyes of the habituants were on him, waiting to see what he'd do. Josh went up beside the horse and tapped him on the shoulder. Excuse me, sir, but it's time for you to leave now. Horse looked over, nuzzled him, and finishing up the last of his beer in his bowl, picked it up and with his teeth and handed it over to the bartender. Heading out the door, he passed Josh, decided he liked him, and gave him a hug by wrapping his head and neck around him. Passing out the door, he noticed Talbot and gave him a hug as well, since they were old friends, old acquaintances. Josh followed him up to the door and watched, astonished as Horace followed Houston to their place. Talbot explained that Horace would go into his stall and close the door behind himself. Josh walked up to Rick behind the bar and simply pointed to where the horse had been. Yeah, he comes in every now and then. The horse isn't what bothers me, though. Tempers are getting short again. I'm having to cut people off because when they get a little too lubricated, they start arguing. Used to be they'd argue about sports or things like that. Now it's about bigger things, and people are taking comments to heart. Houston and Zeke used to argue all the time over sports or over their game of dominoes, but now it's town business, and this getting us into this as a historical site. Well, they've always had to argue about something, but it's never come to blows before. Not the only ones that are touchy about it either. Seems like the whole topic that sets most people off. Talbot had walked in while Josh and Rick had been talking. Thank Rick for the information. You know, this bar is about the best place for getting the pulse of the county. You hear even more gossip, politics, and sports than the general store and the courthouse combined. Rick shrugged and went back to cleaning the bowl Horace had been using. After drying it, he put it on the back shelf to wait until his next visit. Talbot and Josh continued their round. Josh was still thinking about Horace at the tavern. Talbot was thinking about the different views he'd heard about the town being named in a historical area. Zeke had a point. How much growth could they do now if it was approved? How could Main Street expand? What about the influx of tourists if there were any? The only place for transients was the YMCA and YWCA. There weren't any hotels in town, so where would that may stay? If there was an influx of tourists, would a sheriff and deputy be sufficient, or would they need an actual police force? Thought about traffic flow and littering, petty theft, grand larceny. The problems could become huge. As they approached the courthouse, they were met by a large portion of the community waiting for them. Talbot stood on the top step and called for quiet. Someone want to tell me what's going on? The loud response was gibberish, so he called for quiet again. All right, who wants to be the speaker for you? Cat Charleston stepped forward. Normally, Cat was a homebody, but lately she had taken to being an activist. She was determined that the town not become a historic site, and she spent her days going around letting everyone know it wasn't a good idea. She listed out the reasons for Talbot, who nodded in agreement with some of her points. Sitting on the edge of the ledge by the door, he gave his opinion on what she had said, and which the rest of the group seemed to agree with. Ms. Charleston, I have to say, you really thought this through. Some of your points I agree with, but I think you're missing a few points on the other side. Yeah, we'd be limited in what can be changed, but according to what I've been reading, we can still expand just within certain parameters that contribute to the historic aesthetics. Just means the new buildings have to look like the old ones. Yeah, trying to keep some of these older buildings up and running is going to be expensive. Well, I read on that too, and the government will help pay for those renovations. What we're trying to preserve is the unique flavor of the place. It's right here. A group of concerned citizens coming to the courthouse to express their views is one example of what makes this place special. Hell, lots of folks wouldn't care one way or another. Folks, I'm an outsider who appreciates more than you know the friendliness and warmth that you have shown me and my wife. Promise you I haven't had that everywhere I've been, so it means a lot to us. But like I said, though, I'm kind of an outside looking in. Josh is from here and has been here almost all his life. Josh came up. Folks, I left and came home because of what this town means, not just to me, but to all of us. I've seen the city, felt its coldness, even in the hottest weather. I felt alone amongst hundreds of people. This town is more than just a collection of buildings, it's the people who live here. It's preservation of a way of life that we cherish. That close knit community that is found in hell very few places anymore. I moved in an apartment and not one person welcomed me. When I got sick, nobody checked on me. When I needed something, nobody cared. Well, let's say we don't become a historic place. Let's say we tear down all the old and rebuild with new. What happens to the flavor of the place we call home? Hell, isn't that part and parcel of having what we have? In a sense, we live in a time capsule where we still have ice cream socials, fish fries by the river, and concerts in the park. We celebrate our unique heritage. Folks, once we lose that, we become just like everyone else. We become just as cold as the outside world. No more neighbors to go out of the way for. No more personal contests to see whose front yard looks the best. People on the outside don't give a damn about things like that. Look at the big picture beyond the buildings, but at what those buildings represent, and then come to a conclusion. Folks broke up and wandered off, talking after Josh stopped. Talbot was still sitting and shaking his head. Hell, no wonder you went in for marketing. You spun that just right, and it was beautiful. Now you get your ass inside and put it on paper and get it into the Sentinel. You may just become the person who can make this happen. Cherokee, it was a time of waiting and for patience. Morgan had dropped by to remind him of something that he might have forgotten. Sitting in the kitchen, the morning sun gave a cheery look to everything it touched, but unfortunately, no amount of sunshine could brighten the stern faces of the two men seated across from each other. Rocky, you know that this town is pretty well divided in this venture. Justice articles are doing some good, but with the committee coming next week, I don't think it's going to tip the scales one way or the other in time. Each of the councilmen are taking the temperature of their areas, and frankly, it looks like things are still half and half. Do you remember the time you worked as a council president? Rocky grinned. It'd been an interesting time for him. He'd had to balance the scale so even that when someone lost, there was good reason. That way they didn't feel stinted. Took all his skill as a mediator and researcher to keep things fair so that Sheriff Corman was never called in as a deciding factor. Corman finally had tried to trump up charges to keep Rocky from attending the meetings. He had done it not only openly, but had been openly abusive. When he was going to be put out of office, he had whipped out his gun, which he shouldn't have been carrying in the first place in a school gymnasium. Rocky had disarmed him, and he was arrested for a number of offenses, including public endangerment. When he got out, he was a broken man. His bad investments had depleted his fortune, and with nothing left to build on, he left town, never to come back. Word was he had moved to Renville, one of the smallest places in Ohio. We're just going to do a side note here. Renville is actually a town in Ohio, and it really is small. Checked it again, last month, and Renville only has 50 people in that town. So, yeah, it's small. Rocky, this whole shebang will probably be coming down to a tie vote in the council, so it's going to land in your lap as a tiebreaker. Rocky hadn't considered that he'd be called in to decide the fate of the town. A decision of that magnitude could make him very unpopular. Dad, I never thought it would come down to my vote. I've been reading Josh's articles and figured it was pretty much decided. Warren agreed that Josh's articles were having some impact, but people in town were stubborn. Once they got an idea in their heads, it took a hell of a big bulldozer to get them to shift it. Rocky leaned back in his chair and sighed. So if the vote comes to a tie, it's all up to me, and half town is going to be mad no matter which way I vote. Morgan shrugged and nodded. Pretty much. But you know that they know that you're fair and honest. You'll do whatever is best for the town and do it the right way. Just out of curiosity, have you given any thought to which direction you personally feel is the best way to go? I want to get a drink real quick. I hope this thing's working. Rocky leaned back in his chair and sighed. Oh, Rocky brought out a notebook filled with his research. Yeah, this is a big one. I haven't been idle. It should be up to the people, and the people have to agree with what we do. The Historical Society has designated over half the buildings as historical and got them approved. What people seem to fear are the restrictions that go along with being named as a historical place. Well, what I was thinking of is an alternative, something called cultural heritage preservation. It's kind of like a compact with the citizens of this town to keep our traditions and heritage alive. It's a compromise. We can make the changes we need, but in a way that's affordable. We keep going the way we always have done. Set zoning that gives people what they do want outside the city limits. Morgan listened with an ever widening grin. Son, when are you running for mayor? That's the best damn thing that I've heard in a month of Sundays. Get with Frank and put it up to him. If he approves it, get Josh onto it and get the word out. I think you found a solution that'll make everyone, well, if not happy, at least comfortable. Rocky headed into work after dropping Agnes off downtown. Clocking in, he performed the paperwork that came in every night. Going through the wanted sheets, he placed them on the corkboard. It was the same routine in every morning. Paperwork completed, he began the process of getting the place in order. Talbot and Josh had already cleaned it, but it was his habit to check and clean out in the area they missed. He took the coffee pot and back and gave it a thorough washing. That was one of the chores that often got bypassed, and the coffee tasted so much better when the pot had been cleaned. Talbot was scheduled to arrive by 11 o'clock, and then he'd be able to head over to talk to Frank. Getting out his notebook, he sat at the typewriter. He'd work out a condensed version. He was interrupted when Frank walked in, looking stressed. Hi, Frank. Come on in. Have a seat before you fall down. You look all in. Anything I can do? Frank sat and accepted a cup of hot coffee. Yeah, you can take over as president for the city council. Damn it, I only put in the paperwork for the historical stuff to keep the town from getting bought out. Now people are up in arms about it, and either way it goes, half the town is going to resent the other half. I mean, got the mayor breathing down my neck for a solution, and I'm out of ideas. Rocky took a long drink. And if there's a tie, guess who gets to break it? Frank shrugged. Can't be helped, I'm afraid. That clause was put in long before my time. I tried to get it changed and all hell broke loose. Rocky, I know you. You probably studied this problem as much as I have, since you might have to decide. And knowing you, you've probably seen things I haven't. So I'm asking you, what the heck can we do? Rocky brought out his notebook and showed him the passage he felt might be a good compromise. This is the best I can come up with. I don't know what else you have working on this, but you can work this out on them and at the next meeting. It allows us to look at things from a tradition standpoint, which is what people really care about. Buildings went under the Historical Society, and they can deal with them. If we're concerned about aesthetics, we can make a covenant for a certain amount of time that says any new buildings have to be in the style of current architecture. Other historical people didn't come in and everyone feeling like they're under a microscope. Hell, we've had too much of the outside invading here already. And I'd rather we kept a low profile. Frank relaxed in his chair and gulped his coffee. Come on, let's go to get some lunch at the diner. My treat. Seated in the diner, they continued their discussion, keeping their voices low. Rocky, I have to say, I think you've come on the best approach. It's a hell of a lot better than the ones I figured on presenting. Look, will you come to the Civic Council meeting tomorrow? I think you might be better at presenting it. Rocky agreed to be there. Being able to finally relax, they had a leisurely lunch. For 5 minutes. Rocky soon understood why Frank kept his door locked lately. As they ate, or tried to, people came up and expressed their stand on the subject they had just been discussing. Frank first tried to be polite, then to ignore them, and finally he lost his temper. Leaping to his feet, he glared around the diner. Look, there will be a council meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I have a new proposal so spread the word and we'll have it at the theater again so you all can hear what the devil we're talking about. Now please, for 20 minutes, leave me the hell alone. Rocky saw how much this was affecting him and hoped that this new approach would be acceptable to everyone. Frank couldn't go on like this much longer. The next day, the theater was once again being used to have a town meeting. People came in early in the hopes that popcorn and sodas would have been provided. Rocky, having been in plenty of military meetings, had learned one very important fact. If you feed them, they will come. He just personally footed the bill for a second round of popcorn and sodas for the town, which Rob only charged at cost. He also had them showing cartoons until the meeting started. He wanted them all in the best possible mood. Morgan congratulated him on his ideas and knowledge of psychology. It's just common sense, he replied. Whichever it was, it worked. By the time the stage was set and every council member was seated, the townsfolk were laughing uproariously at a Popeye cartoon. Frank waited until it was over. He was fearful of breaking the mood if he cut it off early. The lights came up. Rocky and Frank stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the council has been beating its brains out trying to work out a suitable solution for this town. What we're trying to do is preserve our heritage, and what started as a way of preserving this has turned into chaos. Sheriff Stone seems to have come up with a compromise. I'd like you all to hear. Sheriff Stone stepped aside and Rocky took center stage. Folks, the way I see it, the Historical Society has most of our most precious buildings covered. What they can't cover is the heart of this county, the 101 things that make this place home for so many of us. Sure, some of our younger generation are complaining, but guess what? Just about every younger generation does. Frank here is working on the zoning areas outside the main part of town and seeing what businesses we can bring in. Miniature golf place might be nice, or an arcade where they can go play games. And I heard of a place called Charles de Fromage that has games, pizza, and some sort of robotic shows. It's a good place for the young to go and hang out. In the meantime, we can create a cultural preservation society. Crowds began to rumble through the theater. This sounded exactly like what they had been complaining about. Rocky held his hand. Folks, this isn't something somebody outside has any control over. Well, I guess you could call it a contract amongst ourselves to preserve those things that we all cherish. For instance, anybody here feel we should call off the ice cream socials? A gasp went up. He was practically talking sacrilege. Anyone here feel want to stop the band concerts in the park? A roar of disapproval echoed. How about the fishing tournaments and fry at the river? Or the yearly party in the field? Should these be done away with? People stamped their feet angrily. Frank was worried Rocky was going to get them so fired up they'd riot. He looked around, and even the youngest among them were angry at the thought. He realized Rocky had them exactly where he wanted them. You see, there are plenty of things we do that mean the world to us. They're our traditions, and we hold on to them. All this society does is ensure that they keep on happening. Also, would be involved in any new traditions. Let the historical society do what they do best in preserving the heritage of our buildings. We'll have a new group that takes care of our heart and soul. The acclamation to this suggestion was ear-shattering. People roared and clapped for 5 minutes. Rocky stepped back and allowed Frank to center stage. So, folks, I think we can take it that you want a cultural preservation society started. Another roar of approval. Well, what should I tell the National Register people next week? Final roar of "Tell them to go to hell" echoed along with laughter. The people had been listened to, their concerns addressed, and in a way found to satisfy almost everyone, for the most part. There would always be those who are never satisfied and who would continue to complain, but they would be the minority. And while they might complain, they would still want their home and community to continue. The meeting broke up with people tossing their remaining popcorn like confetti. Rob looked at the mess with a grin and patience began to clean up. Rocky, Frank, and the rest of the committee helped him out. So that if the need ever rose again, he wouldn't balk at letting them use the theater for community meetings. All right, that's it for today. Next reading will be recovery and possibilities. So we'll only be doing two. Ooh, boy, that's a long one. So yeah, we'll only be doing two, and we're getting very close to the end. So that's it for today. I appreciate you stopping by and visiting with me. Oh, somebody has asked the question, will I be writing short stories for children? Now, I've written one short story. It's in a glimpse of my shorts down here, and it's Patches the Bookstore Cat. Very, very nice story, and one that is based on truth. It's based on a cat that my family owned when we had a bookstore, or rather, the cat owned us. So, yeah, I can write short stories. I'd like to do that one as a book and put illustrations on it if I can find somebody that can illustrate it. But I will think of some ideas. If you can think of some ideas, put it down in the comments section on things that would make an interesting children's book. So that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. I look forward to seeing you again on Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning when we'll be doing the next readings. So until then, be good to yourself. Have a good day and look forward to seeing you again. Bye. And now let's see if I can get this thing to shut down. Have a good one. Bye bye. Okay, much better. Hopefully.